Welcome everyone, this is Modex Network Voices. I want to welcome my partner in crime and partner in business, Ivan Rupnik.
Hi Ryan.
Thanks for coming, Ivan, and participating again.
Happy to be here.
We have an expert that's joining us on this video cast, and that is Susanne Rudenstam. Susanne took us on a tour of Sweden offsite construction industry, wood building industry a number of years ago, and has been a close partner in Modex ever since and attended events. We want to welcome her in joining us. Susanne, welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Susanne is the director of the Swedish Wood Building Council in Sweden, and she represents the wood building industry, which is in close collaboration with the offsite construction industry in particular in Sweden. And she'll describe that today. Just want to welcome her and want to invite her to introduce herself and also share with us a little bit about the background. She has some slides and discussion to share about that background of the wood building industry and prefabrication in Sweden. So Susanne, please introduce yourself and welcome to Modex.
Thank you so much. Yes, hello everyone. My name is Susanne Rudenstam and I'm the manager of Swedish Wood Building Council, which is an organization operated in collaboration with the Swedish forest industries and the Swedish woodworking industry. And the target and the goal is to increase the use of industrialized wood building systems within the construction industry in Sweden and encourage the greater use of wood-based systems. We have exciting times now in the industrialized wood building industry. The interest is growing and the industry is also growing pretty fast, gaining ground, gaining market shares. And I will get you an introduction to why this is happening right now and a little bit about the wood, the structure for the whole wood construction industry in Sweden. To start talking about the industrialized timber-based construction industry, we will have to start in the woods. The industry is strongly connected to the forest and sawmill industry in Sweden, and all the leading companies within the industrialized sector are using wood-based systems for the moment. And wood and this renewable resource that we have for our use is actually the foundation for this whole industry to kick off. And in Sweden, we have a very huge volume and of forest. We have a standing volume, or the volume in Sweden is, the forest in Sweden are currently covering around 70% of our country. And we have sawmill and wood industry all around in Sweden. So 70% is our land area is covered by forest, and by that 80% is cultivated forest. And the forest industry is also one of our biggest and most important export market. So the sawmill industry in Sweden has been really focusing on exporting huge volume of sawn timber. And so this is kind of a change now when the growing domestic industry for industrialized construction is growing. It makes another type of demand for the sawmill industry, and the sawmill industry has to adapt in order to supply the growing construction industry. 70% of everything that is cut in Sweden is actually exported, both to European countries, where the UK is the most important one, but also to market overseas, such as China and North Africa. And wood is, of course, our oldest construction material. We have always been using wood in our housing and for our barns and for different kind of infrastructure, road bridges and such. So we have a strong connection to the material. And if treated right, the wood is also a long-lasting and durable material that will stand for hundreds of years. And to give you a short history, we had the first prefabricated wooden pavilions were made in the late 18 or in the early 1830 by an architect that worked for the king at the time, called the 14th Johann. And he made these pavilions, and they were prefabricated and actually exported around Europe. They were exported to Poland and to France and also to Russia. So we had visions at the time, and we developed systems for the development of the more industrialized way for prefabrication and offsite construction. We even had a knowledge of building tall buildings in wood. This was from the World Show in 1897, and this was a building all in wood, 107 meters high. They even had an elevator also in timber. But then wood lost the market to other more modern materials such as steel and concrete. And in order to take back a wood building knowledge, we had to form a new national strategy. And this is the strategy in a couple of bullets. This development took place when we became members of the European Union. And then this was when we got back to being working with function-based building code instead of material-based building codes. And it meant that we could again build tall buildings in wood. So we formed a number of research programs in order to tackle the most critical issues such as fire, static, acoustics, etc., but also to develop the building process. We created a strong regional research and development clusters with participants both from the companies and the academia and also from the society. We had some initial political recognition and support in order to compensate the fact that wood actually had been banned in tall buildings for some 100 years. We also had a national wood building network of municipalities and counties for them to share knowledge and create a network for the buyers. And we also had of course, a work on European level where we formed a program called Building with Wood. And of course, also the standardization work on European level was also really, really important to be able to create a bigger common market. And that was also supported by common research program. And at the same time, we had a development of the industrialization and the progress within the different companies offering the new systems. Throughout the years, we have seen 3 lines of development. We had from the early start, the on-site and prefabricated light versions with panelized building systems. Then we also had the entrance of the volumetric elements for more offsite building, where as much as 94% is done in the factory. And in recent years, we have had the development of cross-laminated timber CLT, which makes the wood also being a material, or the wood-based industry, to be able to take part in the more regular construction market for tall buildings and to build even high rises. Of course, we also see a number of new systems and hybrid systems, such as this from a new startup that builds with CLT-based volumetric system. And of course, we have hybrid systems with wood and other materials, such as in this building, the cultural house up in Skellefteå, where that is actually the tallest building in wood in Europe for the moment. It's a 22-story tall building with, except from the concert hall, it's a library and a hotel and also offices in the very same building. And this is being finalized right now during the summer and fall. So to conclude, the timber construction industry in Sweden looks like this. 2020, we have approximately a market share of 14%, going for, I would say, some 20% this year in multi-story housing. We have a wide presence at leading universities and the building universities throughout Sweden. We have a number of municipalities that develops knowledge through wood building strategies. And we have a really good backlog for 2020, even though the market is a little bit shaky for the moment. But the industry has a lot of and full catalog all year through. We have some 15 producers of timber building systems around Sweden, and we have big investments in new production capacity. Also, new suppliers of timber building system is entering the market. And we also see that the big entrepreneurs and the big national builders start to take on wood projects. And we do have a strong wood and architecture, a great variation of projects throughout the country. And last but not least, we have a really strong political push for increasing the wood construction industry. And I just will go through some of the projects built in recent years. We have housing projects in both in CLT and volumetric systems. And of course, sometimes you can see from the outside whether it's a timber house or something else. This is volumetric timber up in Piteå by Lindbäcksbygg. This is a CLT housing project, another one, and some other volumetrics, lightweight volumetrics. We do have some hotel projects and office buildings, and we have a number of add-ons and building on tops of other buildings. What is often used with the densification in city areas. We have museums and of course a number of schools and kindergartens. And we do have some exciting projects coming up, such as this windmill, which is one of the latest projects. It's also built with modular technique and is as strong and as good performance as a windmill in steel. This one has also just been built or erected in the south of Sweden. And of course, some other type of projects as well, such as this parking house up in the north, a 3-story parking house in CLT. Road bridges, pedestrian bridges. And I mentioned from the start that we do have a strong political push for wood construction, and we actually have an ambition for increased use of industrialized wood construction in our governmental declaration from early last year. And this is from a meeting we had with our housing minister with representatives from the wood industry. So why is that? Why does our government pushes wood construction? There are, of course, 3 driving forces. First and foremost, the need for building with less climate impact, where wood construction with the climate benefits within the material itself is hugely important. But we also need, we have a need for increased housing and more effective construction process. And we do have an increased, we have a need for an increased number of jobs opportunities all over the country. And the wood construction industry is actually answer to all three of those drivers. Having a more industrialized and more effective way of building and better use of all the resources that we use within the construction process is actually one of the most important sustainable actions that we can do. And the industrialized, the housing factories are way ahead of all the construction industry together when it comes to using the resources in an effective way. You can also translate the drivers into the sustainable development goals. And this is like the common language now for the regions and municipalities and even countries to define the goals and their ambitions with what they are supposed to build when it comes to the built environment. Yeah, I think that's it.
Great, Susanne. Thank you very much for the introduction to Sweden. So Ryan and I have been fortunate enough to follow, thanks to you mostly, thanks to follow Sweden for the last 3 or 4 years. And we get in a lot of trouble, and maybe you do too, because we tend to bring up Sweden all the time, because if Sweden didn't exist, we'd have to make it up. So that kind of, well, the market share that you were able to achieve when you brought up the 14% market share, that is not only wood construction, but it is entirely offsite construction, because wood construction in Sweden is synonymous with offsite construction. So for example, for us in the US, we have 80% market share in wood, but most of that is conventional construction. That's just to put it in context for you and also for our viewers. And we have 3%, maybe 4%, maybe 5% overall in terms of offsite construction. So again, and you show good government support, you show good industry support, but things weren't always like that, right? And maybe to come back a little bit, and I think it's valuable for us to understand. So first of all, Ryan and I really believe, in many ways, particularly for the US, but also for European Union, Sweden is unique as a model, both because of its high market share, so just purely practical, but also because of its social and ecological values. And so I think both the economics as well as the ecology is there. But maybe going back to 1994, or you brought that up as a kind of seminal year, things weren't as easy. And I'm just wondering, what were some of the key obstacles? Was it, the political will, was it there? The industry, the industry was focused on export. It wasn't focused on the internal consumption. But also, most importantly, as many Europeans, even in other wood industry heavy countries like Austria, multifamily or multi-story buildings in wood are still not accepted. So what were some, maybe going back a little bit to the difficulties, what were some of the biggest obstacles you would say in the mid-90s when really the industry shifted?
First, I will actually point out what was the main driver at the time for increasing the use of wood, and that was actually to increase the competition within the construction industry. So it wasn't really about climate benefits or not even about industrialized construction. It was about increasing the competition, because the concrete industry were really almost like a oligopole situation at the time in Sweden. Yes. And they didn't use wood at all. They had their origins actually in the concrete industry, and during the post-war area in Sweden, even though we were fortunate enough to not be in the war, the concrete industry and the development of that industrialized industry were based on concrete. But it was also defined by the product itself. So the industrialized construction hadn't that kind of good connotation, but it was rather the post-war really huge schemes. So the development took off, even though the biggest challenge at the time was actually to get the knowledge about wood into the construction industry.
Right. From forestry, but also from outside, because you were looking at other countries. You were even looking at the U.S., which
we did indeed.
Surprised about.
Yes, we did indeed. We went to the U.S. to learn. Yes, in 1994.
Yeah. No, so I just want to repeat that, just because we say this, but we want to make sure that someone from Sweden says this too, which is that the Swedish offsite revolution was not driven by the public sector. It is supported by the public sector. It was driven by private industry. That's an important message for our American viewers. We've been fighting this, honestly, stereotype for the last 4 years, and it's important to say that it had a lot more to do with the forestry sector's desire to shift from an export and fairly low value added product to expanding to internal competition and to a higher value added product, right? I mean, that was, and really the public sector has followed and has supported it, but the initiative first and foremost came from private forestry sector. And then what about the big challenge? Because also from what I know from the 90s, in the 90s, consumer acceptance in Sweden was fairly high, or accepted for single family cottages. Yeah. But not so much for multifamily. So now you're in double digits. What were some of the key aspects to changing consumer expectation? This is probably even more for the European audience than for the U.S. In the U.S., no one really cares what things are made of, unfortunately. But in Europe, I mean, other parts of Europe, people are actually afraid of wood construction. How did that change in Sweden?
I think that we do have, in general, a very positive view on wood. But I also think that in general, the buyer doesn't really care about what material their new home is built in. So I think there was like not an issue really among the buyers, the consumer market, at least. It was another thing among property developers and property owners that was from the beginning a bit hesitant, because we really didn't have the knowledge about the wood systems, and they were rather unfamiliar with them. But it took some time actually from the early start to being able to show. And then it was when we went to the US, for instance, where a number of multi-story are being built in wood with a very good experience.
And then I think that chart you showed us of panelization first, then volumetric, and then CLT. Actually, we assume there's almost a perception CLT is widespread, but really in terms of economics, panelization and light volumetric is a larger part of the market share. CLT is growing, but in fact, it seems like there was another thing that's very interesting to us is the way that, even though again, we love Sweden, it's very innovative, but the way that first panelization became common and people became comfortable with it, it became economical, then volumetric light construction. And like you were saying yourself, CLT is actually still it's a still relatively new system that's expanding. So it's able to compete directly with taller buildings, but it has a particular market share, right? So would you say that, all three systems will continue to be, because they all, or would you see one of them becoming more dominant, the panelized light, volumetric light, or CLT?
I think that we will have all the systems. They are growing, but I think that we will have an increased market share for the CLT. But it's also varies a little bit among what type of projects that we are talking about. Since for commercial buildings such as offices and stores and public buildings for the public sector, schools, etc., then we will have with more specific both in terms of height but also in terms of span, then you will need to go for CLT systems. So it varies a lot, but I do think that we will continue to see that the big numbers of housing will be in lightweight volumetric,
right,
with a high level of efficiency.
Related to that, Susanne, because the initial drivers were not necessarily about the environment or about energy efficiency, when did those drivers start to push offsite construction further and further? Because I know that more and more panelizers claimed that they could get a better efficiency or a better air tightness or whatever it was. When did that happen in Sweden?
Yeah,
we have had quite a big focus on energy efficiency throughout the development of modern construction, I would say, because we do have this climate. So and especially the focus on energy efficiency became really apparent in the late or in the mid 70s in the energy crisis, and since then we have had that. So there has always been a big focus on energy efficiency, but the climate discussion has not really. I mean, it was really after the Paris Agreement, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, there were early discussions in the late 90s, but it really took off after around 2015. So it's quite a new when we see this really strong focus on climate.
Yeah, and how about the code? How about the code also? Because Ivan and I were interested when we were there, and you were teaching us, and others were teaching us that the light wood frame building code changed to accommodate taller buildings, and that really opened up a window of competition. Well, would you talk about that a little bit? Yeah.
Yes, it was 1995 when we had harmonized building code with the rest of the European Union. We became members the 1st of January 1995, and we had been preparing for that for quite a long time before that. But before we had that change, it wasn't actually permitted to build taller buildings than 2 stories in timber-based systems. And so it was hugely important.
And what's the height now?
No limits.
No limits.
You can go. Yeah, no, it can go as high as you wish.
Right, because we've seen 8-story lightwood frame, which is not possible in the U.S. And it's fascinating because you were looking at the U.S. in the early 90s, and a year later or two, you had buildings that we can't build to this day because of code.
I guess for lightweight systems, volumetric or panelized systems, then it's the technical limit is 8 stories, I would say. So we don't see taller buildings than that. Sometimes it's combined with a 2-story of concrete in the base, but normally 8 stories.
And maybe what do you see as just kind of closing out? So I mean, it's an amazing model for us in the US. There's things that are very compatible that we really want to understand. It's an amazing model for other things that are happening in the European Union. What do you see as the next challenges or opportunities in Sweden? What's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years in wood?
I think it's actually exciting times. I think we have built the base now, the foundation. We have the knowledge and we have the size of the industry to really being able to take on a much bigger share of the market. And I think we are in a good position. The wood construction industry is really in a good position because there is such a need now for a more effective and resource effective in the construction industry with a higher level of productivity, where also the possibility with digitization and all the new technique is going to be built. And there is also a demand for that. the buyers are starting to actually look for new solutions and new, more effective, more cost-effective solutions as well, together with of course the huge need of the green transition and to really addressing the big impact, the big waste streams that comes from the industry, together with all the emissions that comes from producing concrete and steel. So I think the wood-based industrialized construction is in a good place.
With that, I want to thank Susanne for joining us and give a little bit of a taster for what's coming down. We're going to run a Sweden webinar with ModX in the near future, and Susanne will join us, as well as our previous guest, Helena Lidlow from Lindbäcks, and we'll be talking more about business models in offsite construction in Sweden, and give you a preview of our live tour that we hope to join Susanne on very soon. So with that, I want to thank Ivan Rupnik again, and thank Susanne especially for spending time with us here on ModX Voices.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susanne.